The year is 64 CE. Through the claustrophobic serpentine alleys of Rome, a woman is paraded, her body fully exposed, skin caked in grime and crisscrossed with savage welts. A sea of thousands converges, their voices merging into a deafening roar of primal bloodlust as iron fetters scrape against stone, pulling her inexorably toward the colossal gates of the Colosseum. And trust me, the torment she's already survived is merely the prologue to a nightmare that defies comprehension. What I'm about to unveil will shatter the very foundation of what you thought you knew about Roman grandeur. By the time we reach the end of this dark path, you will understand exactly why this chapter has been deliberately buried by historians, and why even now, academic circles shy away from its grim truths. I'm going to lay bare 3 horrifying realities that will be seared into your memory long after we're done. First, we will expose how Rome engineered public execution into a grotesque theater of sexual violence. Second, you'll discover the specific defiance that could condemn a woman to this unimaginable fate. And third, I'll reveal why the empire's most powerful figures, the emperors themselves, weren't just passive observers, but often the chief architects and active participants in these atrocities. But here is the crucial fragment of history that most discussions conveniently ignore. If you're prepared to confront the raw, unvarnished truth about humanity's most depraved instincts, hit that subscribe button now, because what you are about to learn will permanently reshape your view of the ancient world and may force you to see unsettling reflections in our own. You believe you have a grasp on Roman barbarity. You've learned about gladiators locked in mortal struggle, correct? That was mere entertainment compared to the abyss I'm about to expose. The genuine, soul-shattering horror was a punishment meticulously crafted for women who dared to defy the empire's absolute power. Now, place yourself in Rome's Gilded Age, between the 1st and 3rd century CE. This is an empire that holds sway over half the known world, erecting architectural miracles that still leave us breathless, forging systems of law that echo in our courtrooms today. By all accounts, this should be the absolute zenith of human achievement. Yet, beneath that gleaming facade of marble and lofty proclamations of virtue and honor, Rome had perfected something far more sinister than mere death. They had weaponized sexual degradation into an instrument of state, sanctioned terror the likes of which history had never seen. Here's the brutal truth about the Romans. Merely extinguishing a life was not enough. The empire demanded a spectacle, something with such reverberating force that it would echo through every narrow street, seep into every household, and poison the dreams of any potential dissenter. These public killings were not just punishments, they were elaborately staged productions, masterfully directed to annihilate not just the body, but to crush the spirit, erase dignity, and obliterate the very humanity of the victim. Let me reveal what the sanitized history books deliberately omit. Rome didn't just execute women who challenged their control. They systematically obliterated them through the most intimate and humiliating violations conceivable, transmuting their final moments into a live, pornographic display for the roaring masses. And here is the critical point: this was not random, chaotic violence. This was calculated psychological warfare, honed over generations, perfected by emperors who knew that the mere specter of sexual humiliation could enslave an entire civilization. The most chilling part: the crowds revolted in it. Men, women, even families with young children would pack the stands, salivating for the moment when women were stripped bare, defiled, and subjected to drawn-out torture before the final, merciful release of death. But everything I've described so far is merely the surface. That grim parade through Rome's heart was just the overture to something infinitely more terrible. Stay with me, because what transpired inside the arena will make everything prior seem like an act of compassion. Envision yourself crammed within the teeming arteries of ancient Rome. The stench is suffocating. A mix of unwashed humanity, rotting refuse, and something else, a palpable charge of dread and perverse exhilaration. The heaving mob grows agitated because they know what is coming. Then you hear it. The metallic, rhythmic scrape of iron chains grinding on ancient cobblestones, growing steadily louder. The crowd heaves forward as guards emerge, dragging a completely naked woman into the forum's center. Her supposed crime: adultery, perhaps, treason, or maybe simply spurning the advances of a man with influence. This is what the Romans termed damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. But this is where your blood should run cold. Before she ever faced those animals, she had to endure something arguably more destructive: The poet Martial recorded eyewitness accounts that historians have tried to keep buried for ages. His writings depict a frenzied mob pelting these defenseless, exposed women with feces, rotten food, and sharp stones. But that still doesn't capture the full depth of the horror. The guards orchestrating this nightmare would force the condemned woman to stop at strategically chosen points throughout the city. These pauses were not random. She was made to stand naked outside the temples where she once worshipped, directly before the homes of her own family, in the bustling markets where she once bartered. What was the purpose of this meticulously planned route? Because the Romans had mastered a grim truth: destroying a person's dignity was a more potent weapon than killing them. They weren't just eliminating an individual, they were systematically expunging her entire identity from the collective memory of the community. Martial's accounts tell of one woman who instinctively moved to cover her body. The guards deliberately shattered her fingers. Another collapsed. Trying to escape the lecherous stares, she was wrenched back to her feet and forced to continue, no matter her struggle. But here is the detail that should freeze your soul. Families weren't just allowed to watch, they were expected to. Roman parents regularly brought their children to witness these processions, branding it as a moral lesson on the consequences of challenging Roman power. More disturbingly, the condemned woman's own relatives would often join the mob, hurling stones at their daughter, sister, or mother. Why would a family participate in such brutality? Because refusal to take part in the public shaming meant they risked sharing her exact fate. And those guards, they weren't mindless brutes. They were trained in the science of psychological torment. They knew precisely how long to linger at each spot to maximize the agony. They understood exactly how to position the body for the ultimate degradation. But that harrowing journey was merely the prelude. What awaited these women inside the arena's maw would make everything you've heard so far feel like a kindness. Don't look away, because what I'm about to disclose next will disturb you on a level you didn't think possible. The arena conceals truths that will force you to stare into the very abyss of human nature when power becomes absolute. The massive arena gates slam shut behind her, the sound echoing like a death knell. 50,000 Roman citizens pack the stands, their roars indistinguishable from those at a modern-day stadium. But what unfolds next has nothing to do with lions or the noble clash of gladiators. This is about perverting a human being's final moments into a live, pornographic exhibition for mass delight. Here is the reality historians have spent centuries trying to suppress. Roman executions were never meant to be quick. Women condemned to the arena were forced to enact mythological scenes of rape and violation before being killed. Executioners would dress them as legendary figures, Europa being taken by Zeus disguised as a bull or assaulted by the swan. But these were not symbolic plays with actors. Roman authorities used animals, specifically trained to sexually assault these women, while tens of thousands of spectators watched, cheered, and treated it as a day's entertainment. The historian Cassius Dio preserved the trial and punishment of Empress Messalina in horrifying detail that still shocks the modern conscience. When she was convicted of adultery, though her real crime was threatening the emperor's power, she was subjected to every form of degradation Rome had perfected. It began with her being stripped naked before the empire's most powerful senators. Then, they forced this former noblewoman to crawl on her hands and knees across the bloody sand while the crowd rained projectiles upon her. But that was just the warm-up. Here is the element that turns your blood to ice. The Romans had a specific term for this torture: supplicium. It wasn't classified as simple execution. It was the systematic, deliberate eradication of a person's humanity, identity, and soul before finally allowing death to take them. They would parade in animals, bears, bulls, horses, all conditioned through brutal methods to commit sexual violence against human beings, while families in the stands ate and drank as if at a festival. But here is what no one wants to admit about the audience's role. They weren't passive. Spectators were given the power to vote on the next torment. An upturned thumb meant more humiliation. A downturned thumb supposedly asked for a quick death, though mercy was a rarity. Roman mothers would point to specific torture techniques, explaining to their young daughters how to avoid the same fate. Fathers would dissect the victim's screams for their sons, framing it as a lesson in power and control. The emperor's private box was positioned for the perfect view, and this was no accident. These spectacles were more than entertainment, They were live-streamed masterclasses in imperial dominance, a stark warning to anyone who would dare challenge the system. And the most haunting detail, the one that will linger with you. Some of these women remained conscious even after the animals were done. The blood-drunk crowd would demand they be kept awake for the finale, being dismembered piece by piece while fully aware of every excruciating sensation. Yet, there was one category of woman who faced a fate even more terrifying. The story of the Vestal Virgins will reveal a cruelty that makes all other horrors seem almost tame. Now envision the most revered, untouchable women in all of Rome, the Vestal Virgins. These priestesses guarded the eternal flame, the sacred fire believed to sustain the empire itself. They wielded influence surpassing senators, commanded respect from generals, and lived above the law. They were inviolable until the moment they weren't. When a Vestal Virgin was accused of breaking her vow of chastity, Rome faced a divine dilemma. Killing a holy priestess might invoke the gods' wrath, but letting the defiant stand could shatter imperial authority. So, they devised a punishment more psychologically devastating than any public execution. Here is precisely what they did. First, they stripped the accused Vestal naked before the entire Roman Senate, forcing every senator to witness her shame. But they didn't rush. It was a slow, ceremonial undressing, during which the senators would debate her fate for hours, leaving her exposed and trembling. But that was only the beginning. The historian Pliny the Younger documented the fate of Vestals under Emperor Domitian in letters that were suppressed for centuries. He describes how they would beat these sacred women with iron rods until their skin split, all while keeping them conscious. Then came the most horrifying component. They buried them alive, but not in an ordinary grave. They lowered the condemned woman into a specially constructed subterranean chamber containing just enough air to keep her alive for days, even weeks. They left her with a single oil lamp, a morsel of bread, and a sip of water. Not enough to live on, just enough to prolong the agony. The chamber walls were lined with sharp, broken pottery, so if she tried to claw her way out, she would tear her fingers to the bone. Every single detail was engineered to maximize psychological and physical torment. Here is the detail that will haunt you. These underground cells were acoustically designed so that Romans above ground could hear the screams for days, sometimes weeks. And Romans would bring their families to these sites to listen to the agonized wailing, calling it a sacred rite. Pliny records one Vestal who survived underground for 18 straight days. 18 days in absolute blackness, slowly starving, listening to her own screams echo off cold stone, knowing salvation would never come. But here is the most twisted part of this barbaric system. If by some miracle she survived, they declared it divine intervention, proof the gods had spared her, and then executed her anyway, claiming she had defiled the sacred ritual by not dying as planned. Emperor Domitian personally oversaw the construction of these torture chambers. He visited the sites to inspect the work, ensuring the acoustics would perfectly carry the screams upward. He called this innovation, theological engineering, using sound to demonstrate divine justice. But the most shocking revelation is this: emperors didn't just design these systems. They made the torture intensely personal. And what I'm about to reveal will show you the absolute depths of Roman depravity when power faced no consequences. Here's the truth that historians desperately don't want in textbooks. Emperors didn't just attend these spectacles. They designed them. They refined them. They participated personally. They turned sexual humiliation into their private, state-funded entertainment system. Emperor Caligula didn't just watch executions like a common spectator. He choreographed them like a stage director. He spent weeks planning every detail of a woman's degradation, consulting with architects, animal trainers, and torture specialists to invent new forms of suffering. But here is what will curdle your blood. He would extend special invitations to foreign diplomats and ambassadors, forcing them to watch. Representatives from Egypt, Germania, Britannia, all compelled to witness Rome's capacity for creative, systematic brutality. It was Lev broadcast diplomatic terrorism, a stark message to every rival power. Historical evidence suggests Caligula had a specialized arena built beneath his palace where he could privately experiment with torture techniques on enslaved women before unveiling them in public. Emperor Nero escalated the depravity to new extremes. He would dress as a gladiator and personally take part in the sexual assault of condemned women. The crowd would roar as their emperor raped prisoners to death, proclaiming it divine justice delivered by a living god. But here is the most terrifying revelation, the one that should shake you to your core. This wasn't the madness of a few unstable individuals. This was official policy. Sexual humiliation became Rome's standard diplomatic weapon. When foreign queens defied Roman rule, the empire didn't just execute them, they broadcast their degradation across every territory as a grim warning to other rulers. The historical consequences rippled across the entire world. What we've journeyed through today was not the work of a handful of madmen. This was systematic. This was bureaucratic. This was socially sanctioned torture endorsed by the most educated, sophisticated civilization of the ancient world. And here's what should keep you awake tonight. Public shaming remains a tool of control in our modern society. We've simply upgraded the delivery system, social media mobs, viral humiliation campaigns, coordinated harassment designed to destroy reputations, careers, and psyches. The technology evolves, the platforms change, but that core psychological drive to dominate and destroy through shame has remained constant for millennia. The Romans convinced themselves they were civilization's peak, while they cheered for sexual torture as family entertainment. What comfortable lies are we telling ourselves today? What are we normalizing that future generations will look back on with the same horror we feel for the Roman arena? Think carefully. What entertainment are we consuming right now that people a century from now might view with the same revulsion? What forms of public humiliation have we woven into the fabric of our digital age without even realizing it?